Morning, everyone. This week, House Democrats will continue to focus on executing our For the People agenda. Over the last 2 years, we made promises to the American people about what we were going to focus on, and we were very clear that each and every day we were going to fight for the people. Not for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. That's what the other side does well. Exhibit A, the GOP tax scam. That our effort, our energy, our focus was going to be to deliver for working families, middle-class folks, senior citizens, the poor, the sick, the afflicted, veterans, and people all across America. Urban America, suburban America, rural America, ex-urban America. We're going to fight for the people. And we laid out a clear agenda: fight to lower health care costs, fight to increase pay through a real infrastructure plan, fight to clean up corruption in order to bring our democracy to life. And why are we focused on H.R. 1? Because there's a clear connection between a corrupt system in Washington, D.C., where the fix is in for special interest against the public interest. And that's why it's important for us to address this corrupt system if we are going to help the middle class and all those who aspire to be part of it. And the American middle class is frustrated for a good reason, because the American dream is slipping away. It was always the case in this country that if you work hard and play by the rules, you would be able to provide a comfortable living for yourself and for your family. That contract has in many ways been broken because the system is corrupted. The system is rigged. The fix is in. Too many people are bought and paid for. That is why we are proceeding with H.R. 1 to bring our democracy back to life for the people. And with that, I'm so proud that we've got two very distinguished members of the freshman class who came to Congress with a wealth of experience serving this nation. That's what makes them such authentic representatives of the American people. That's why Democrats are in the majority. That's why we remain committed to getting things done on behalf of everyday Americans. And let me now yield to the distinguished gentleman from Colorado's 6th Congressional District, Jason Crow.
Thank you, Chairman Jeffries. Like my colleague Abigail Spanberger, this is my first time in elected office, but not my first time in service to our country and community. Over the last couple of years, I've had a lot of conversations with folks in Colorado and in my district, and very early on, something very profound happened as I started to have these conversations. I would knock on somebody's door and introduce myself, and the response started to be the same over and over again. People would say, you know, you seem like a nice guy, and I like what you have to say, but, you know, I don't think it's going to matter. Republicans, Democrats, it doesn't really matter anymore, is what people started to tell me. That the system is rigged, that even if you seem like a nice person and you go into it for the right reasons, eventually you get changed. You get pulled into the system. And I thought about that, and it had a big impact on me because it reminded me of something that I heard and experienced when I was in Iraq and Afghanistan. This sense of helplessness, the sense that the system was working against you and that there was no way you could access the system and have a level playing field. And that's why I dedicated early on to change that, because I was unwilling to accept the country that I love so deeply go that direction and for that corruption to seep into the trust of the people in my community. So that's why I was very proud, along with Abigail and many other members of the freshman class, to co-lead a letter last October calling for H.R. 1 to be this comprehensive campaign finance reform bill that we see before us this week. But only in the halls of Congress is this a partisan issue. Because everywhere I go and people that I talk to, regular Americans of all political stripes, understand deeply that we have to level the playing field for Americans. And only here has this become political. That's why I am proud to support H.R. 1 this Friday, and I call on everybody in Congress to help us restore the trust between American people and their elected representatives to do the right thing so we can be the country and democracy that Americans deserve. So it is my privilege now to yield to my esteemed colleague and great friend, Abigail Spanberger.
It is a pleasure to be here today. I thank you so much for your time. As we as Americans have seen in newspapers and TV, Congress is currently grappling with the challenges of our time. We have skyrocketing healthcare costs, unaffordable prescription drugs, a changing climate, a digital divide, continued gun violence, and a younger generation faced with earning less than their parents. And Congress cannot meaningfully address the nation's significant challenges without first recognizing and acknowledging the undue influence of special interests in our politics, working to root out corruption at all levels, and working to restore the commitment and the belief that the American people have in those whom they elected to serve. This week, Congress is focused on ensuring that we are serving the public interest. And while scholars and pundits may debate the precise meaning of the term public interest, I can tell you what public interest is not. It is not voting to give pharmaceutical companies billions of dollars in tax breaks while thousands of Central Virginians struggle to pay for their overpriced prescription drugs. The public interest is not politicians choosing between which big donor receptions to attend while their neighbors back home are choosing between food and shelter or medicine. The public interest is not a constituent watching their former member of Congress leave Capitol Hill to then immediately take a good job on Wall Street or on K Street to lobby against the interests of the very people they once served. And the public interest is certainly not trying to rip away health care coverage for millions of Americans, including thousands of Central Virginians with pre-existing conditions. In 2017, I watched repeated attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act as those with pre-existing conditions worried what it would mean for them, as parents whose babies had been born premature worried what it would mean for their children if lifetime caps were restored, and as self-employed entrepreneurs worried what it would mean for their businesses if they lost access to affordable, life-saving coverage. They watched their futures grow uncertain simply because their leaders had chosen to side with the privileged business interests and the individuals driving rhetoric rather than listening to the people they were entrusted to serve. And what's more, across the campaign trail, I heard from voters like Jason, I heard from voters that they didn't believe we could fix it. They didn't believe that their elected officials would work to address the problems facing our country because they felt that too many outside influences were driving the conversation. And I chose to run for Congress because I believe that every American should have faith that their elected leaders are working to fight for them. And I have seen enough of Congress refusing to repair our broken democracy, and I have seen too many people just express a concern that we're not going to fix problems. So in November 2018, the American people put their trust in a new generation of lawmakers to tackle our nation's problems, and we need to demonstrate to them that we are doing it with a renewed commitment to integrity and transparency so that they know that we are working to serve them. In November, the people of Central Virginia gave me a clear mandate: clean up corruption in Washington, and I'm proud to support H.R. 1 because it delivers on that promise. Our legislation would help limit the influence of special interests in our politics, stop big contributors from hiding their political spending, keep foreign dollars out of our elections, and strengthen oversight of our campaign finance laws. These are all steps we can take that will help voters across this country believe that we are working in their interests. It empowers citizens. This bill allows us to take back control of our government, to listen to the voices of those we represent, and it lays the groundwork for an agenda focused on building stronger levels of participation across our democracy. In Virginia and across the country, voting needs to be fair and free and not a burden on our citizens. And this bill takes appropriate steps to strengthen voting rights and takes aim at discriminatory barriers. This package of reforms brings something to the table that we need more of in Congress: a hopeful message, a unified message, and a fundamentally American message of common sense and good governance. And we're at a time when we're seeing rampant division within our country, and I hope that this legislation will take one step forward in restoring our commitment to serve the public interest, not special interests, and will help affirm to the American people that we are here working on exactly what they sent us here to work on, which is on their behalf. I look forward to voting in support of this bill and in support of the public interest. Thank you. And I yield back to my esteemed colleague from New York, Mr. Jeffries.
Thank the distinguished gentlelady from the Commonwealth of Virginia, as well as Jason, for their leadership. Any questions?
Mr. Jeffries, your caucus is divided over Ilhan Omar's remarks right at a time when the president is calling your investigations harassment. Don't you need to be united now, and how is that division hurting you?
Well, I don't accept the premise that we're divided. We are united around the view that shutdowns are a reckless form of trying to negotiate when there are two branches of government that are in disagreement. That's why we held together, we reopened the government, and Donald Trump engaged in an unconditional surrender. We're united around the fact that we have to do something about the gun violence epidemic in America. And guess what? With H.R. 8 and H.R. 1112, we did something about it. Universal criminal background check legislation that, by the way, was bipartisan in nature. Historic, because no one in this Capitol had done anything about gun violence for decades in a meaningful way.
Say you're united over Ilhan Omar's remarks?
We are united around the fact that we're going to continue to fight for the people. That's what we're united around. We're united around lower health care costs. We're united around increased pay for everyday Americans. We're united around our For the People Act to clean up democracy.
Are you concerned that the investigations and the document requests can overshadow your legislative agenda at times, the Cohen hearings, for instance, over the background checks bill last week?
Well, we have a dual responsibility. We have to continue to advance an agenda on behalf of the American people focused on kitchen table pocketbook issues, and that's what we are doing. At the same time, the House is a separate and co-equal branch of government. We don't work for Donald Trump. We work for the American people. We have a constitutional responsibility to serve as a check and balance on an out-of-control executive branch. We will not overreach. We will not over-politicize. We will not over-investigate, but we will do our oversight duties consistent with the Constitution.
The Treasury Secretary is now using extraordinary measures to meet our debt obligations. What's the plan for either raising or extending the debt limit?
Well, it's very important that we not inject unnecessary uncertainty into the markets, into the economy, and perhaps trigger a march toward a recession. That is the worst thing that we can do. And Democrats and Republicans should just come together and raise the debt ceiling in a manner that will allow us all to move forward. We can have conversations about fiscal responsibility, but we will not be lectured by anyone on the question of our debt and our deficit. When they passed a tax scam where 83% of the benefits went to the wealthiest 1% and increased the deficit substantially, now it'll be over $1 trillion, and increased the debt by almost $2 trillion, and then they want working families and middle-class folks and seniors to pay for it by trying to stick it to Social Security, Medicare, and other things.
Already happening? Is there a sense of urgency to work on that now?
There's a sense of urgency with respect to us, and those conversations are ongoing.
Thank you, Chairman. On H.R. 1, the ACLU of all groups, usually one of your biggest allies in these fights, they have a lot of concerns over free speech. They are essentially saying that a lot of the provisions here are subjective, that they have intrusive disclosure requirements, they discourage free speech. Two questions here. Can I get you to address those specific concerns from the ACLU? How committed are Democrats to working with these groups on targeted amendments to address their First Amendment concerns?
Well, at this point, we agree to disagree with the ACLU in terms of their perspective, but we're open to working with everyone to address concerns. That's why there will be over 70 different amendments on the floor of the House of Representatives between today and tomorrow.
On the anti-Semitic resolution, it's our understanding language is being reworked to make specific changes. Can you speak to the status of that, and are you still committed to bringing it to the floor this week? And also, do you think that Ilhan Omar should not be in the House Foreign Affairs Committee?
Well, that's a decision that the caucus will have to make relative to committee participation, and that's not a discussion that we've had. We are committed to decisively condemning anti-Semitism, racism, white supremacy, Islamophobia, homophobia, and the rise in hate that has taken place in this country, perhaps coincidentally, over the last 2 years since January of 2017. Sorry, we'll get you.
Representative Tlaib called for immediate start to impeachment proceedings. Are Democrats united on that position?
Our view is that we have to allow the ongoing negotiations to be completed. Bob Mueller has work to do. He has to complete his investigation, report to the Department of Justice, and allow Congress and the American people to then process those findings before deciding how to proceed. Impeachment is premature at this moment.
Does she complicate your message, though, that message?
She doesn't complicate the message because, listen, there are 435 voting members of Congress. So sometimes that will mean you have 435 independent contractors accountable only to the communities they were elected to represent. But within the umbrella of the House Democratic Caucus, our position is clear. We are going to fight for a kitchen table, pocketbook, issue-oriented agenda while simultaneously engaging in our oversight responsibilities. That does not involve impeachment.
In this question, I also like to get Ms. Spanberger to weigh in on this. Mr. Probe, and this is for both of you. Sorry. There was a comment yesterday by the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell regarding this resolution on anti-Semitism, and he said that there was a rise of anti-Semitism in the House, particularly targeted the House Democratic freshman class, and some of the things have been said there. Do you feel that way? And secondarily, to you as a member of the freshman class, do you think that there's a problem with some of your fellow freshmen?
Let me just generally say there is not a rise of anti-Semitism in the House of Representatives. There's a rise of anti-Semitic behavior and activity and violence in the country. And it's irresponsible for Mitch McConnell to try to politicize this issue. Anti-Semitism isn't a political issue. It's an issue that we all need to collectively address and do it in a nonpartisan way and not fan the flames of division by trying to promote Mitch McConnell's political agenda. That's the height of irresponsibility. And when has he ever said anything about the hateful remarks that continue to flow out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue? When has he ever said anything about that? And so we're not going to be lectured by Mitch McConnell on anything, and that shameless behavior must be discontinued.
I think a man who hasn't met any of us can't really comment on the positions of the freshman class. I think that the data show that there is a rise in anti-Semitism across this country, a notable rise of anti-Semitism across this country. In our own community, we've had Jewish community centers vandalized. We've had children's camps vandalized. In Virginia, we saw people walking in the streets of Charlottesville, marching in the streets of Charlottesville, chanting Nazi chants. Categorically, there should be no hesitation among any member of the Democratic caucus to denounce the rise of anti-Semitism in our communities in Virginia or across the country. And I think that it is incredibly detrimental to the cause of fighting such a scourge that someone would seek to, in fact, politically capitalize on this terrible trend and increase that we've seen throughout some of our communities. And so I think we've seen many members of Congress categorically denounce anti-Semitism, racism, Islamophobia, homophobia, the list goes on, the rise of white nationalism. And that's what I hope we'll continue to focus on, and ideally focus on that and then move forward as a community, serving all communities, so that a community member, regardless of their religion or their national origin or their race or their religion or their sexual orientation, believes that we are working for them because we've put in place strong campaign finance reform legislation, believes that we're working for them because we are acting on the things, talking about infrastructure and healthcare, in my community, broadband internet, and all the things we promised along the campaign trail. And so I think affirming what it is that we believe in, denouncing the terrible challenges that many of our communities are facing is incredibly important, and we're doing it so we can take that next step forward and continue serving our communities and legislating in an impactful way so we can actually govern for the American people.
Let me go to the back.
Yeah, but so if lawmakers have already condemned anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, what's to be accomplished by putting this resolution, which could be fairly broad-based, on the floor?
Well, there are ongoing discussions with all of the stakeholders within the House Democratic Caucus about the appropriate way to proceed. Clearly, there's been a rise in anti-Semitism in this country, a rise in racism, a rise in hate crimes, a rise in xenophobia, and that we as a nation should be alarmed at that fact, and we as a Congress should be prepared to address it decisively, and address it with one voice.
When?
The timing is being worked through. That's a discussion that you're going to have with Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, who controls the floor.
So you put a lot of time into H.R. 1. You've made these lovely placards, and you've written a lot of materials about it. And you've gotten asked 7 or 8 questions about the Omar situation and 1 question about H.R. 1. You're in an age where one tweet by one member who is a freshman can derail an entire week that you have planned out for presumably weeks in advance. Is that frustrating, and what can you do about it?
Well, what is frustrating is that the system has been rigged year after year, decade after decade, for big pharma, for big oil, and for other special interests. And that's why we, as the House Democratic Caucus, as we promised to the American people, are going to fight to unrig the system and break the back of special interests in Washington, D.C. And so the American people are frustrated. We know that they are frustrated about a system that doesn't work for them, it works against them. And we are doing
frustrations in leadership about having to sort of deal with the fact that we're in a Trumpian age where one tweet can change a narrative. What's that like when you're trying to sort of push what you believe is an affirmative agenda? Is it frustrating for you personally as leadership, and what can you do to kind of counteract it?
We are going to continue to proceed with a focus on our agenda. Nothing good is accomplished by being distracted by issues that divide the nation. We want to bring people together. There are folks in this town who want to tear folks apart. We want to move the country forward, and there are folks who are trying to turn back the clock. We're fighting for the public interest. There are others who are fighting for the special interests. That will remain our focus.
Another issue that arguably one could say has divided the caucus to some degree, and unfortunately the freshmen who I wanted to ask about this have left, as the motion to recommit matters. Both of those freshmen who are here have voted for some of the motion to recommit that Republicans have offered. Do you guys have a path forward on how the caucus can stay united and not let those motions to recommit get adopted, especially as you have H.R. 1 on the floor this week?
Well, I think our path forward remains to keep the focus on the promises that we made to the American people. And those weren't just political promises when we talked about fighting to protect people with pre-existing conditions, or lower health care costs, or drive down the high price of life-saving prescription drugs. Those were heartfelt promises based on what the American people were telling us we needed to focus on. We're going to keep the focus on a real infrastructure plan. That's what unites House Democrats. That's important to the American people. We have a $1 trillion plan. We think it'll create 16 million good-paying jobs, help fix our crumbling bridges, roads, tunnels, airports, mass transportation system. That's what unites House Democrats. That's where we'll keep the focus and breaking the back of the special interests by moving forward and bring our democracy to life to H.R. 1. That's where we're going to continue to keep the focus on. We can have ongoing discussions about procedural matters. At the end of the day, the core driving force for the House Democratic Caucus is to fight for working families, middle-class folks, and senior citizens.
To follow up a little bit on that, are all of these things that we're talking about here growing pains and struggles that you guys are going through because you explicitly chose to expand the party, and are you guys addressing that directly?
Well, Speaker Pelosi has consistently made clear that our diversity is our strength, our unity is our power. And whenever we've been unified, we've been successful. We were unified with respect to the effort to stop the other side from taking away health care from tens of millions of people, and we were successful. We were unified in opposing the Republican tax scam. We may have lost the legislative battle. We won the communications war. That's why they abandoned that reckless bill. They don't talk about it. It's in the Witness Protection Program, and it is the most unpopular so-called tax cut in American history. We were unified in the face of a 35-day reckless government shutdown, and Donald Trump, at the end of the day, engaged in an unconditional surrender. That wasn't a victory for us. It was a victory for the American people. And so we're all clear that as long as we continue to remain unified around the core issues that we've promised the American people we would address, then we're going to be successful on behalf of this great country. One last question.
Sorry to ask another Omar question, but should her name be mentioned in the resolution? If this happens again, should she then be removed from her foreign affairs committee position?
Well, those are discussions that ultimately are broader caucus discussions. I'm not going to weigh in on that one way or the other. Let me say something about the particular charge of dual loyalty. We must find a way to address the vicious charge of dual loyalty because it has a very dangerous history with respect to the Jewish people. The charge of dual loyalty has resulted in violence against the Jewish people. It's resulted in persecution of the Jewish people. It's resulted in ejection from country after country with respect to the Jewish people. So it's an important conversation for us to have. Let's keep the focus on the issues that are at stake because they are incredibly important for us to address. Thank you, everyone.
Do you believe Ms. Omar is guilty of, preaching dual loyalty? Do her words amount to dual loyalty?
I issued a statement along with every other member of leadership on February 11th with respect to this question of anti-Semitism as it relates to every different aspect that has been raised, and I'm going to stand by that statement. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.